Could you explain a little bit what is the significance of a council not submitting its accounts on time?
Well,
Like,
straight
what
off,
does that mean?
from an average person's point of view, it's a concern.
Yeah.
Because local authorities are supposed to have officers who can account for every penny,
Yeah.
or should.
Yeah. And how long has it been that they haven't now? 2 years in a row?
2 years, yeah.
So for 2 years in a row,
Yeah.
the county council hasn't actually submitted its accounts.
No, it has, but it's not been certified.
Ah. So who certifies it?
External auditors.
Okay. And how many? Wait, that's not the only council in the country that's done that, though, is it?
All councils are the same. I mean, it's not. I mean, Cambridge County Council is not the only council in the UK, in England, that have issues with financial year-end accounts being certified.
Yeah.
External auditors are bound, duty bound, and guidelines and regulations make sure of this to cover everything. And if they find an anomaly, it must be investigated and inquired on.
Yeah.
And this is why you have the public auditor, for goodness sake. You know, if there are monies going missing in your public services,
Yeah.
then you want to know what's going on, why,
Sure.
and who's misusing or spending it or losing it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what makes me think straight away. We've got years worth of diminishing services, cutting frontline staff,
Yeah.
and seemingly council tax rising up and things like that, and then 2 years worth of unaccounted for accounts. There's a huge grey area where we could just give them the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure everything's fine.
So are you talking about specific areas of Cambridge County Council in the partnership, or are you talking about overall?
Very, very high salaries. A lot of money spent on consultations,
Yeah, okay.
which sometimes don't go anywhere. A perfect example is the Cambourne to Coton busway, or Cambridge to Cambourne to Cambridge,
Yeah.
which has gone on for 7 years, I think, and has cost 18 million to
Alright, so-
date.
yeah,
So
so-
that was last year.
I've noticed on social media
Yeah.
a lot of people critiquing some of the projects that have taken place, the Chisholm Trail, plus the roundabouts, the newly built roundabouts, the Dutch-style roundabouts, where they've all blown out budget. Why? If you have a remit to outsource that work to a third-party contractor, someone should be looking at those submissions and checking the costings and making sure it's feasible and doable and within budget. If they blow out, then who's responsible? Is it the contractor or is it the council? The way councils write contracts, the onus is always on the contractor. The question is, who agreed that contractor to do the work if they were so inept at delivering within budget?
Yeah.
And who foots the bill? Well, the contractor will foot the bill. There are penalties. Whenever you outsource anything for local government, local authorities, there is always an element of penalties. So if you get this wrong, this is what you're going to be fined. And if they don't have, then there's something wrong with that council. They need to look at that again and change their contracts, because you want that service delivered. You want things brought in on time. You want it done to a standard that is reputable and isn't going to wear out pretty soon.
Yeah.
Particularly on large infrastructure projects. Yeah.
In your personal experience going back, when a council sort of leases or subcontracts a project, outsources to a company, is there a correlation between which company gets the contract and who issues the contract? What I'm getting at, of course, is the potential for preferential treatment and maybe giving the contract to someone you know or are friends with or maybe invested in.
Somebody recently used the word nepotism on a radio interview.
That's it.
And I thought, well, it's kind of stark, but it certainly has a correlation with how some councils have been perceived to run their businesses, because they would award to their either a favourite service provider that's delivered before, or if there's been a change in executive, whether it the executive of the council or committee members, maybe there's, jobs for friends type thing, favours. I've not necessarily seen that myself, but I have observed with one or two local authorities where a contract has been renewed and extended and renewed and extended with some slight changes in service delivery, which tend to be redacted for public reasons, because it's private-public contract, so it's protected. It's commercial in confidence, they call it. But you don't want the rest of your competition to find out what those elements are. Otherwise, they would end up putting up a different proposal. But essentially that they dictate what the outcome will be. But if they keep on getting those contracts, it does beg the question, is it because genuinely they do a really good job and they have been some of the best performers in the contract regime across local authorities? Because let's face it, I'm aware of there being 4 or 5 companies that provide services, outsourcing service to local authorities, preferred service deliveries. I won't name them. I'm not going to pick one or the other, but they're there to be found, and it's pretty easy to find them. Even if you took the ultimate one, which central government uses, Capita, for example, right? They all have longevity in public service.
Yeah.
But you've got to ask the question, who's sitting on the board of those companies?
Yeah.
Now and in the past. You look at the profiles of those companies and you'll find that they are people who have come out of politics.
Yeah.
And those companies continue to get awarded the contracts. So you have to say, well, with a breath of fresh air, what would happen if you put up a completely independent new company that come along and make a competitive bid and see where that goes? The trouble is, it's all about resources. There's poaching of staff. It's as soon as you win a contract, you're going, hang on a minute, let's we've got a staff shortage here. Let's take some from that bunch, pay them a bit more hourly rate or whatever.
Well, what's your opinion on this then? This is just if you found an example of something like this happening, what would it mean to you if somebody had worked for one of the outsourcing companies, for example, design work or consultancy or the whatever it is that they do, charge X number of thousands of pounds to the council to do it, and then they move from the consultancy company and actually get a job in the department who they used to be consulting for?
I have seen that happen. Yeah.
What does that mean? Because obviously that's not...
Well,
you can move to a place...
Okay, the conflict of interest comes to mind.
Yeah.
But is it?
But
if they've got the job through a legitimate process, and it's of benefit to both parties, whether it's the contractor and the local authority that's awarded the contract, and they are delivering and excelling, there shouldn't be a problem.
No.
It's when they aren't that's the problem. And you have to look within to see what those relationships are and who has emoliated them, who has allowed them to happen, and why. Because at the end of the day, it's yours and my tax.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say one of the words that does get used by the kind of the critics is revolving door.
Yeah.
Sure. And I suppose that kind of thing, it blurs the lines between the different entities and their impartiality, or what's supposed to be putting the public need first, rather than what could be their own agenda. If
the agenda is genuinely to help deliver public services and not personal gain, then that's great. There are numbers of wonderful people I've worked with who swear by that process, and their life is about service, simply. There are some who their vocation in life is to work in public service and help people. But there are others who are not so finely attuned to that and are looking for their own benefit gain. And you could say, well, hang on, it's the same everywhere, whether it's private or public sector, people do that. Yeah, there are ambitious people around. But you've got to focus on what it is about public service. What is the purpose of a local authority? To deliver services, to get the basics right, and then if there's some money left, to help do more in consultation with the population of that county or that borough or shire or district. Let's put it out to them. Let's ask them what they'd like us to spend this money on now, what we've got left over.
Yeah. Well, let's change the subject a little bit,
Okay.
and if we talk a little bit about something that we alluded to a moment ago, which is where there are rules already in the statutes at various points in time in the past, which from what I've been able to see over the last year haven't actually been adhered to. Right, so three examples. I was going to say 3 examples that I could think of. Yeah. The first one is the local government. I can't remember what it's called. Local Government Act.
Yes.
Is that what it's called? You sent it to me.
The Local Government Act, 1978.
Because this enshrines.
It goes way back before then, but
sure.
For
but this
more
basically one of the core principles of that is the citizen's right to scrutinise. Expect transparency and to be able to essentially self-monitor, I suppose, or at least gain the access to the information that is relevant to that scheme.
Okay, let's keep it nice and straightforward then. So, because in the past I've always been asked when I've dealt with people's concerns or complaints, if I have to refer to the Act of Parliament, I have to then explain which chapter, which section, for them to be able to see for themselves that it's not just me spouting a bundle of words, but it is actually law. And as you know, Parliament is sovereign. So those laws are laid down by our representatives in that place of democracy. If you don't like it, you lobby to get it changed, but you don't break the laws. No. Otherwise we'd have anarchy and chaos. The Local Government Act 1978 is the one I refer to most because it's more to do with recent generations and decades, although it carries a lot of what was preceding it. The other is the Localism Act, which was created in 2011 by the then Secretary of State for Communities and Housing, Eric Pickles.
I've got it here.
There's a wonderful, straightforward, basic English guide to the Localism Act, which anyone can print off.
You don't say.
Okay, yeah.
The Localism Act. Plain English guide. I read it yesterday.
It's
very good.
Not like 400 pages of the Act itself. It actually summarises very nice and easy what it means and who's responsible and what has to be done and what your rights are.
Well, this is my immediate thought.
Let me just clarify that.
Yeah, go on.
So the key thing is the Localism Act defined the Nolan Principles significantly in terms of standards of service in local government, but also in central government as well. It was a report produced by Lord Nolan for the government of the time, which set out 7 principles that everyone must abide by in local government and central government.
I've got them. Shall we read them?
Sure, why not? Because I think people will be interested to see. Yeah. In fact, I would suggest you just have a look at that because it does tend to summarise specifically what each of those 7 points are.
So this is basically the same thing.
Oh, okay, good.
It is the same thing.
All right then.
Actually, it
Excellent.
is the same. These are the seven Nolan Principles of public life. 1. Selflessness. Holders of public office should act solely in terms of the public interest. 2. Integrity. Holders of public office must avoid placing themselves under any obligation to people or organisations that might try inappropriately to influence them in their work.
Let's just look at that again.
Yeah, this is the one that jumped out of me straight away when I read it. They
avoid placing
themselves
under any obligation to people or organisations that might try inappropriately to influence them in their work. Well, who might they be? Who might those groups be?
Yeah.
Lobby groups.
Exactly.
Charities.
Yeah. Activists.
Business groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got. I mean, they starting now in the election period. They send around their questionnaires and things like that because they try to kind of gather the data about what the candidates think. But it's clearly in thrust of their own campaign.
See, here's the thing: if there was sufficient transparency, which is part of the Nolan Principles in public service delivery, you wouldn't have people like me concerned with the fact that there may be these strange shenanigans going on where they should not act or take decisions to gain financial or other material benefits for themselves, their family, or their friends, and they must declare and resolve any interests and relationships.
Exactly.
Otherwise known as pecuniary. Now, most committee meetings that are held by a local authority, there will be councillors asked, do you have any personal interests? And they will announce yes or no. So pecuniary interests are covered.
Yeah.
But this is important. People don't trust government right now, local or national, because they have a fear that something else is going on.
Well, there's certainly a sense, particularly in Cambridge, that there are small groups who have influenced or
Too much influence.
Have an influence, a strong influence
Right.
over the decision making and the policy making sort of machinery.
Let's look at that a little bit, though.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with a lobby group. If you have the interests of the community at heart, and you truly believe and feel that what you're proposing is good for and right, then no problem. Have your ideas heard. The problem is if you're the only group that continually gets that opportunity, or that you are so proactive that it dominates and takes control of what happens to the rest of the community, the majority.
Yeah.
And then that policy is imposed on the majority, even if it only suits a minority of people, for that to happen.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I don't feel good about that.
No.
I'm actually I'm strongly animated about that when I find out about that happening.
And this is why you're standing as an independent.
Exactly. I was just going to say one of the questions that I was asked this morning was, do you would you agree with, I can't remember the wording of it, but it was, would you agree with creating safer roads, would you create preferential safety circumstances for children over the rights of motorists? Something like that. Basically, you could see, well, you want to reduce car use, and you're using the children as a kind of a leverage tool to not say what you really want, but you're coming in from this angle of safer streets for children.
Pose a question to get a specific answer.
Yeah, and bear in mind that the questionnaire was specifically a yes or a no questionnaire. You weren't able to put anything else in.
Well, there are people in my age group who would say, if you look back in the last few generations, how we ended up in this position. Is it gaslighting? Is it wokery? Or is it reasonable to say that we need to change the way we live and move around? Let me just make the point that for all our lives we've had systems that have allowed the protection of and security of our youngsters. And as social media has grown and developed, as traffic or the volumes of traffic have increased, it's become a little bit more dangerous maybe. But why has it become more dangerous? The road traffic rules are the same as they've always been for many years, and everyone's learned to abide by them.
Yeah.
What we have is an influx of people who choose not to follow those rules. They choose to ignore the road traffic rules. And they're not always doing it in a car, and certainly not on public transport. And I vaguely can recall an incident where a commercial vehicle has done the same, although many of them do tend to park on the pavement sometimes because they can't get access in any other way. But you tend to find it's motorcycles, it's scooters, it's cyclists, regrettably, that are tainting that concept. Schools have always had the ability to restrict speeds through the local authority under an RTO to say, let's just calm down traffic, 20 mile an hour speed limits around schools. Fine. But don't do it to the detriment where people are driving their kids into school, piling up in a row, we call it kiss and drop, I suppose, say goodbye to your child and off they go. And then you're driving off, but you've got queues and queues of traffic building up, which causes congestion. Now, so if you're going to introduce schemes like that, make sure that you've created a mindset, a plan to allow those vehicles to pull to a side. So there's a lay-by for them to do that. Not just to clog up the streets until the kids have got out the cars and the next car, etc. and so forth. Yeah, I mean.
Well, I found the questionnaire sort of loaded and disingenuous, and I didn't know who it was coming from, and it struck me as another example of one of these alliances you know, and that's what I'm talking about. And in the answer to the question, how did we get here? If we could just quickly jump away from this for a second. I read this plain English guide to the Localism Act.
Yes.
And it actually seems like what the situation we're in at the moment is an unintended consequence of this. Yeah. Because they wanted to decentralise power in 2011.
Yes.
Knock it off to local councils so that councils can do pretty much whatever they want, other than create new laws. They're allowed. If you and I wanted to do something, we could do it. Yeah. If the council just want to do something, they can do it.
Yes.
That's what the Localism Act is for. It's so that local people have more of a say over what happens in their area.
That's right. Yeah.
But the unintended consequence of that is that the planning process, it might be 5 or 7 or 8 years long, gets jumped on by activists or small groups, lobbyists, interest groups, while the rest of humanity are just going about their daily lives. They don't know anything about it. And then all of a sudden you get to 2022 and you find out that there's this congestion charge thing coming along and it's being imposed by the county.
Top down.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the Localism Act is saying people don't want. They don't want to feel like they're being imposed upon. Yeah. And they want to have a say over what...
It's a contradiction.
Exactly, but it just is... Now you've shifted the problem away from central government imposing to county council imposing. Yes.
Why do you think that is? Why would central government, any government of the day, choose to devolve that responsibility to a local authority? Because of money. Right. Because of accountability, because of taxpayers' revenue. You will provide local authorities with a core grant every year. Here's the money, go and spend that on what you need to. If you overspend, tough. You have other ability to raise revenue through council tax and business rates. Although with business rates it's then redistributed per capita head across the country anyway. So it's popped back into the central government pot and spread out again. But with council tax, it's exclusively for the expenditure of local authority to do what they like with, to cover the services they're responsible for, the precepts, etc. The mayoral precept for extra money for rural buses, even though there's already been significant millions of pounds funded to cover those elements. You have that problem with the franchise at the moment. What are we going to do? Is it going to be franchise or is it going to be local government take control of it? Blah, blah, blah. Or hypothecated taxes, which the mayor could impose on us. So saying, I want to raise, because we can't get congestion charge money anymore because it's flawed and fallen over, we need to raise another 15-20 million pounds to improve bus services or bikeways, cycle paths, which are already pretty damn good in Cambridge anyway. So let's put another 50 quid on everyone's council tax bill. It's all very possible and plausible. So it's about local government then having to be responsible for and answerable to the money they're spending, not central government. And you hear this in Parliament.
So I was just about to say, is that not valid then for our local councillors when we suggest things or when people suggest alternatives? If they say that's not up to us, it's up to central government.
There is that.
How much are they passing the buck?
That horseplay happens a lot. You see it if you spend some time, boring as it might seem, watching some of the committee meetings. It's the kind of hyperbole you see or hear frequently, where it says there's one or two councillors who are chairpersons of committees that regularly blame central government for a lack of funding, and yet when money's given to them at the last minute, they suddenly find an alternative way of using that money rather than putting it where it's really needed.
Here's a question, and this is a thought I had whilst I was reading this. How true do you think this assessment is? So this piece of legislation was put in 2011, 13 years ago. When a piece of legislation gets passed through Act of Parliament, there is a slow permeation, sometimes if at all. And actually, more meaningful pieces of legislation might go unnoticed or unobserved or unenforced, and actually they take a long time to make any changes to the areas where they're intended to. And actually, a lot of what's been written here hasn't actually arrived yet.
I would agree with that to an extent, but this brings us back to the very reason we're having this conversation, because it's about education. And I say that from a point of experience where I have had to deal with complaints where councillors have overstepped the mark in a different area and involved themselves in other councillors' wards by suggesting what they should or shouldn't be doing. And in fact, it's very clear in the Localism Act what the councillors' remits and responsibilities are, and they chose to break them. And in that particular instance, the councillor didn't hold their position for very much longer. They didn't understand the Localism Act. Why not? Surely as any elected representative must have an understanding, a basic understanding of what the Nolan Principles are, i.e. standards in public service, the Localism Act, so they know what the remit is and what they can and can't do, but also perhaps familiarise themselves with the Local Gov't Act. And the Local Government Finance Act, because council tax is the biggest pain in every councillor's backside.